Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for this session. Today we have with us Mr. Michael Pettersen. Michael is the director of company history. We are very privileged to have him on this session, and he's going to take us through a very important time in the history of Shure as a company. The years we are talking about is 1946 up till 1955. So I am really looking forward to this one. I'm sure you are as well. Once again, thank you for spending your evening with us today. And over to Michael.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here as well. Greetings from very early morning here in Evanston, Illinois. So I am the company historian. I've been with Shure since 1976. So I'm now starting my 44th year. I can't quite figure this out because I'm only 40 years old, so I'm not sure how that worked out. But I think you'll enjoy what's going on here. I believe we'll answer questions at the end, so you could hold your questions till I get through this. And let's go. It's a fairly long presentation, so here we go. So let's just start out where we're at now. So this is June 2020. And for those of you who don't know much about Shure, we're a privately held corporation. We have 35 locations worldwide. And since 1925, we're proud to say that our products have delivered the sounds of history and culture to the world. Now, Mr. Shure, who started the company, died in 1995, and then his wife owned it, and she passed away in 2016. But they established trusts to carry out how they wanted Shure to operate. And so there's an employees trust that actually controls the company, and there's a charitable trust that supports philanthropic organizations. So basically, Shure is a for-profit company that is operated for the benefit of the charity. And this is pretty much how the Shures ran their life as too. Well, so when they were gone, passed away, they wanted it to happen to occur as well. And so that's how we operate. But like many companies, our road to success wasn't smooth. And so following World War II, we had to reinvent ourselves to really make it in a changing world. So let's see what's happened. Let's go back a little bit before World War II. So in 1930, we were called Shure Brothers Company. And we were not a manufacturer, but we were a catalog house, and we were distributing products. We're not manufacturing at all, just a distributor. So it's the Depression. You may know that the worldwide depression, the Great Depression, started around 1929, went to around 1936. And so we had to add things besides radios, which is what our primary business was. And we were adding waffle irons and toasters and percolators and all kinds of things, anything we could think of to stay in business. So this is actually a page from our catalog in 1930. We not only had household goods, but we had sporting goods as well. We had ice skates, and we had soccer footballs, and we had regular American footballs, all kinds of different things, whatever we could think of to stay in business. But there was one new category that Mr. Shure thought had potential, and that was microphones. And so he found companies to distribute. In California, there was a company called the Universal Microphone Company, and there it is there. That was a Universal mic. And there's also a company in Chicago called Ellis, and here's an Ellis microphone. Now look at the price of these. This is $54 in 1930. If I do some quick math, that would probably be about $1,500 or $2,000 today. But he thought microphones had potential because there was all these new technologies that needed microphones. Two-way radio, public address systems, radio studios, recording studios, and so forth. So we got into microphones by being a distributor. But by 1940, so that was 1930, by 1940 we actually were a manufacturer of microphones. And here's our catalog from 1940. Probably all recognize the Unidyne over there, our most famous microphone of all, and additional microphones, plus phonograph cartridges and various things. So we said we manufactured microphones and acoustic devices, anything that was related to microphones and audio. Ben Bauer was the gentleman that invented the Unidyne, and without Ben Bauer, I can honestly say I don't think Shure would be in business today. Here he is. This is a photo from around 1945. So Ben was born in the Ukraine in 1913, and by the time he was 12 years old, had lived in the Ukraine, Poland, England, and Cuba. And at age 16, he came to the United States to go to college and also teach himself English at the same time. That's how bright this guy was. So eventually he ended up at the University of Cincinnati, and unfortunately, Shure had several people working at Shure at the time who went to the University of Cincinnati. And they found Ben Bauer as a student and brought him up. And in 1937, he started at $15 a week as an engineering assistant. And basically, he rose to become the vice president of engineering by around 1945. And he left Shure in 1958 to work for CBS Labs. At his death, he had over 100 patents to his name. But without Ben Bauer, Shure would not be the company it is today. So, World War II starts in 1939 in Europe, and of course, in December 1941, the United States is forced into the World War II when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. So we start getting our first contracts to build microphones and headphones for the Allied forces in 1942. And we went from 100 employees to over 1,000 employees, a factor of 10-fold in just 12 months. You can see this on the right. That's actually a catalog of microphones in action, and talked about how microphones were now an important aspect of war. Here's a war mural from the Shure factory in Chicago, and I'll just read the first line. Today, the human voice is a weapon of war. We at Shure Brothers are engaged in making such microphones for the Army, Navy, and Air Forces. Shure microphones and Shure workers are important to all America. So again, from 42 through 45, Shure was primarily a manufacturer of military products, military communication products. Here's some assembly line workers in 1943. The microphones on the right are called the T-17s. They were the most widely used microphones throughout World War II. And here's a portfolio of some of the devices that we made during World War II. There's a T-17, which I just mentioned. Here's a battle announce mic. This would have been used on battleships and aircraft carriers. This is a mask mic that would have been used by fighter pilots. Here are headphones. So actually, our making headphones go all the way back to the 40s. And here's the throat mic. The throat mic would be actually a microphone that you press up against your throat because it was so loud in a fighter plane you couldn't hear a regular microphone. At our peak, we were making 1,000 of these throat microphones per day. Our quality, Mr. Shure has always stressed quality, and our quality was so good that we won this, what was called the Army Navy E for Excellence Award 4 times during World War II. Most companies only won it once. We actually won it 4 times in a row. That's Mr. Shure here on the right. And we actually have one of these banners in the archives. If you ever come to Niles, whenever we can accept visitors again, that is actually in our archive. This is 1943. This is some photos of our products in action. You can see our earphones up here. There's the throat mic down here. Here's a battle announce mic here. And here's it's a uniplex being used, I think it's probably by a reporter of some sort. So, this here is an ad from 1944, and we are basically trying to position ourselves for post-war economy. The war would not end for another, 18 months. But you can see where the line here is. Research such as this assures you of a new standard of microphone performance for post-war. So even before the war was ending, Shure was running ads saying, well, we're going to be available our products will be available after the war. And this type of research we're doing to the war is going to help us for those post-war products. So when the war ended, what did we make? Well, we started to plan for this in 1944. Here is a document, which is our post-war planning document. And you can see that the number one product that we were going to produce is hearing aids. Hearing aids, microphones. Why? Excuse me one second. Let me just get a drink of water. It's early here. So many soldiers, of course, suffered hearing damage during the war, and hearing aids are going to be in big demand. So that was what we're going to go after. And this is what we primarily were thinking about in 1944. Here's an ad from 1944 that basically touts Shure as an innovator in microphones for hearing aids. As it turns out, we didn't go into this business, but we were trying to position ourselves to be ready to go into that business after World War II. But what do? Well, we decided not to go after the hearing aid market. Instead, Mr. Shure, he took a different path, which is what we're going to talk about. And there was a patent consultant working for Shure named Hugh Knowles. Hugh, when he left Shure, founded Knowles Electronics, and that became a world leader in hearing aid microphones. Knowles Electronics is located today about 15 miles from where Shure is. Sure Shots is a company newsletter, and this is from 1944, and I'm just going to read this paragraph where you have the arrow here. We are prepared for the day when peace returns. When that time comes, Shure Brothers will have stiff schedules to meet, this time for the manufacturers of radios, home recording sets, public address equipment, and other large quantity buyers of our peacetime products. So Shure wanted to be an OEM manufacturer, a company that makes microphones and other devices for other companies to put into there. So, for example, a tape recorder, a wire recorder, they require a microphone. A two-way radio set requires a microphone. That is what we're going to look about, is becoming an OEM supplier to companies like that. While these needs do not call for as great a quantity of production, they must be made in large quantities and still measure up to their responsibility and quality. And ever since, this production is war production today. So during World War II, our products had to be built to what was called military specification. And consumer products are just, military products must stand up to much worse environmental conditions than consumer products. So Mr. Shure liked the fact that our quality went up when we used military spec. So he made the decision that after when the war ended, we were going to build consumer products to military spec. And we still do that today, which is why our products are so durable and reliable even in 2020. So, also from Sure Shots. Excuse me. We at Shure Brothers can and will make our contribution to the national economy, and will do so through our combined efforts. We will produce the fine products that add so much to the happiness of the American home. So what did we make? Well, here's the cover of our 1946 catalog. And we said we make some microphones and acoustic devices, and also pickups and cartridges. These are the same categories which are listed in the 1939 catalog coverage. Excuse me again, another drink of water. I must explain to everybody, I actually did one of these last night at about 9 o'clock, so that's why my throat's a little raw this morning. So Shure now manufactured microphones for non-military applications. We offered carbon mics, and crystal mics and dynamic microphones. I won't get into how they operate, except crystal microphones. I just have to talk about crystal microphones because I find them so interesting. Crystal microphones, I don't believe are made today, but there is a salt crystal that can be grown called Rochelle salt. It's like a table salt, but it's not a salt that you eat. And if you take a very thin sliver of a Rochelle salt crystal, and you hold down one end of it and you stress the other end of it, when you move it slightly, it produces a signal. And literally, crystal microphones had a thin sliver of salt inside, which produced the audio signal, the electrical signal. It's really astonishing. What's even more amazing is that crystal microphones actually sound really, really good. So we were offering three types of mics, carbon, crystal, and dynamics. We were not offering ribbon microphones, even though we had first produced our ribbon microphone in 1939. Some of the things we did, we took our military products and we rebranded them for professional and consumer use. All the microphones you see here were designed for the military. This one here, this was a battle announce microphone that we basically redesigned so it could be used with mobile transmitters, two-way radio. Same thing for the carbon microphone here. So the idea is we had the tooling, we had the technology, now let's just reposition it to sell it to different consumer markets. Radio stations were a target for our Unidyne microphone. Again, Unidyne microphone down here, probably the most famous Shure microphone there is. And this is a map of the United States showing all the different radio stations that were using the Unidyne microphone in 1946. Of course, many more radio stations were coming on board as the war ended and there was a need for programming. This is a Sure Shots photo from 1946. At the time, we were making 200 record cutter heads per day. Record cutter heads, well, before tape recorders or wire recorders, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, were popular, people would actually cut records at home for their own use. They would basically have a record cutter next to their radio, and when favorite radio program would come on or certain music would go on, they would actually cut records at home using a Shure cutter head and a turntable. So this was a technology that preceded wire recorders and tape recorders, and as it says here, at our height, we were producing about 200 record cutter heads per day. One of the fastest growing markets was pickups and needles, phonograph cartridges, essentially. The soldiers that came back from the war had money to spend, and of course they heard music during the war as well. So in 1946, there were 280 million phonograph records that were manufactured, and there were 300,000 jukeboxes. And by 1950, there were 500 million new records would be sold each year, and that's just in the United States. So obviously, records were being played, and there were needs to play it, and that's where Shure was there with our phonograph record pickups, we call them, or phonograph cartridges as we refer to them today. Here's our 1947 catalog cover, and I just like this because the lifestyle illustrations of the products. So two-way radio for the police and fire. Here's someone doing probably a public address or a paging. Here's a radio station. Here's a train that would have two-way radio. Here's a dance with public address. Here's a film set, basically showing how our microphones are being used in the field. We call that lifestyle illustrations, and this is the earliest catalog that we had that actually showed lifestyle illustrations. Two dynamic mics we brought out in 1947, the Sonodyne and the Econodyne. The styling is actually based upon a microphone that came out in 1937, so we just went back and probably used the same tooling. And of course, this is kind of a variation of our Unidyne. Well, at Shure, we have an archive. In our archive, we have one of each product that we've made since 1932. And a lot of times we go back and we look at these old designs and we reuse them. So I'm sure my friends at Shure over there in Shure Bangalore have recognized that the 51 and the 52 look very much like motive microphones, USB microphones that we currently base on. So take a good look at these mics. And now I'm going to advance the slide. And these are our current microphones. This is the Motive 51 and the Motive MV5. Let's go back one slide again. Take a look. There's the 1947 microphones, and here's the 2020 microphones. So sometimes it's good to steal from yourself. Here's another microphone we introduced. This is our first microphone with a plastic case, and this is a low-cost crystal microphone. It was actually kind of a dark red color. And this was a consumer product, not aimed at the professional or the industrial market at all. Primarily used for home PA systems and home recording, called the Versatext. So there was another new technology that was coming about, television. Radio, of course, was very big, and television stations started going on the air in 1947. And then we took the Unidyne and said, well, it's not only good for radio, but it's also good for television stations. So here's a map of the United States showing radio and TV stations around the country using the Unidyne microphone. The Uniphase Technology. Uniphase Technology is what Ben Bauer invented, and it was a way to put an acoustical network inside of a microphone and make it directional. It was a real huge breakthrough. As a matter of fact, today, I would guess 98% of all the directional microphones in the world, Shure and otherwise, use some form of Ben Bauer's Uniphase technology. This microphone here was brought out to basically offer that directionality at a lower cost, and it was called the Monoplex. It was a crystal mic, not a dynamic, about half the price of the Unidyne 1. Another issue that was phonograph record wear. So back then, when you were tracking, the weight it required to track a phonograph record was measured in ounces, and the records would wear out. So you could you might wear out a record in playing it 50 times or more. So this is something that we decided to address by having what's called muted stylus needles. Basically what they were is that they were needles that just had a much finer finish on it. They were not as rough and tracked at a lighter weight. And so you can see it would say replace the heavy pickup arms of pre-war design. So again, this is a consumer market, people playing records at home, and now Shure offers you a way to play your records and not wear out your records, thus saving you money. We also addressed the aftermarket for phonograph pickups and needles. So there were record shops back then, and people would come in to buy new phonograph records, phonograph cartridges or pickups for their arms. So Shure came out with basically 5 different models that would replace 58 OEM versions. So this was a way for a record shop or a repair place to keep 5 models on hand rather than 50 or 60 to replace their things. Again, aftermarket. I love this memo. This is from 1947. This is Ben Bauer. We already talked about Ben Bauer. And this is a memo that basically says, geez, I've got the idea of a wireless microphone. We are considering the development of a transmitter to be located on or in the microphone stand, or perhaps within the microphone itself, for the purpose of eliminating the cable between the microphone and the amplifier. So what you're looking at there, my friends, is the earliest documentation I have ever found at Shure about the idea of a wireless microphone. And we will show you where that led later. I just think it's great to have a document like that. So in 1946 and 1947, our sales forecasts would not be met. The demand exceeded the supply, but the primary reason that we couldn't do that was there was a shortage of components and raw materials such as steel and aluminum. So the demand was out there. We couldn't keep up with it because we couldn't get enough steel and aluminum and other things. And therefore, we had a slight reduction in staff and in working hours. But in 1948, things would improve. This is a famous photograph from Shure, from United States history, and there's the Unidyne there, of President Truman, who had just been elected, but a newspaper here in Chicago said that Dewey defeated Truman, which is not the case. Truman actually defeated Dewey, and this newspaper came out just a little bit too early. I just show you there because there's one of our microphones. One of the neatest things about working about Shure is that you can look at historical photos from around the world in the 20th century and the 21st century, and typically there is a Shure microphone somewhere capturing that bit of history. So before there were tape recorders, there were what are called wire recorders, and many people don't realize that. Wire recorders actually were recorders that used a very thin wire, and about 1 mile of wire would give you about 1 hour of recording. And so we made wire recording heads as well as tape recording heads. And so here are 2 heads that we made, one for tape recording, and you can see that big flat spot for the tape to go over. And here's the wire recorder, which is a very thin groove, which that wire would go into. We actually do have 2 working wire recorders in the Shure archive. Shure did not make the wire recorders, but we made the heads that are on there. They still operate, and it's quite amazing the fidelity you get off of a little thin piece of wire. I think the wire went through at about 24 inches per second, I believe, was the recording speed of it. So it's 1948, and we're starting to make now tape recording heads and wire recording heads. Another thing that was new for us in the 40s was we started making print ads. We started actually advertising in magazines, and that was a new thing. We had catalogs, but we had never advertised in magazines. So here's an ad from 1948 about the Sonodyne and the Versatext. So the plans for 46, 47, 48 were effective, even though there was a shortage of raw materials. But then for 49, what were we going to do to grow? Well, I found this recently, our sales objectives for 1949. And so what we decided to do in microphones, we were going to hold the leadership of the Unidyne series. We're going to establish a new low-price microphone line, increase the sales of the Sonodyne and the Monoplex, and introduce a new press-to-talk stand switch. This shows you who we were selling to. Our 5 different customers were essentially electronic parts distributors, manufacturers of radio sets. That would be, like radios you would have at home. Communications equipment manufacturers, that would be like Motorola, who made 2-way radios. Recording equipment manufacturers, that would be like Wollensack or Revere, who made tape recorders or wire recorders. And export, meaning sales outside the United States. And we were going to not only work on the microphones, we were going to establish ourselves in a new cartridge area. The cartridges continued to grow. We were going to offer new phonograph cartridges and new pickup arms as well. And at the bottom here, introduce new low-cost home recording microphones. Again, home, as you can tell. And we're going to try to attain our leadership in tape heads and also establish our dynamic microphone line. So this is just kind of some of the ideas of what we were trying to work on in 49. So that was the strategy. In 1948, Columbia introduced the new micro groove record. Of course, these are the records that operate at 33 1/3, and there were 300 grooves per inch and could contain up to 22 minutes of music. This was like a major advance over the 78 RPMs that only had 100 grooves per inch. So in 1949, Shure Engineer began the development of cartridges to play the microgroove recordings. Here's our 1949 catalog. Again, lifestyle illustrations. I like this. Here's a dance, radio station, at home, at the beach, or at a record store auditioning your favorite records. All these places needed phonograph cartridges. And Shure was there with new phonograph cartridges and replacement cartridges for the OEM ones that would have been on the phonographs when you bought them. We also expanded into another type of microphone called controlled reluctance. Another term for that is controlled magnetic. This was a transducer technology that was developed during World War II, extremely rugged, very, very rugged. And so by 1949, we were offering carbon and crystal, controlled reluctance, and dynamic microphones. Here's an example of a controlled reluctance microphone. It's called the Green Bullet. We brought this out in 1949. It was brought out as a two-way radio microphone. But this is yet another example of the many successful Shure products that were over the years, which were brought out for one thing, but the market and the customers said, nope, it's much better for this. So though we brought this out for two-way radio and for PA systems or paging systems, it was blues harmonica players that discovered that you could take that microphone off, it fit into your cup it into your hands really nicely, play your harmonica into it, and get this distorted sound known as the Chicago blues sound, and it makes a great harmonica microphone. So here's a mic we brought out in 1949, 71 years ago, and we still make it today for blues harmonica players. Another growing market for the controlled reluctance microphones was mobile two-way radio. Mobile two-way radio was really expanding in the late 40s and early 50s. Here's our Ranger push-to-talk mic. Looks very much like the Model 100 from World War II because it was the same outer casing. We just replaced the element with a new controlled reluctance compared to the carbon that we used during World War II. Another microphone we brought out was called the Rex, the Hercules. This doesn't give you an idea. This is a very short microphone. This is probably maybe 3 inches tall. And this was sold primarily as an OEM product to manufacturers of tape recorders, wire recorders, and so forth. There's lots of these. You go on eBay any day and you put in Rex or Hercules and you probably come up with 15 or 20 for sale. They're very cute little things. They're offered in green and blue and brown and different colors, but there's a lot of them out there. Here's an example of the Rex Hercules uses a two-way radio dispatcher. Probably not. It's just a great photo. Probably most of these were used for wire recorders and tape recorders. And here's another example of taking I love this design. This I don't know if it looks like a dirigible or it looks like a rocket ship or whatever, but this is a design from the 1938 approximately. And basically, Shure, we had the tooling again, put in a carbon microphone element, and then started to advertise this for two-way radio and for general field use like public address. So again, going back, taking tooling and designs from the 30s, updating them with new cartridges inside, and then selling them for the late 40s. We added a grip to talk, slide switch, different accessories. Another way accessories were ways for us to expand our market. You can see here's a push here, a push and hold, a rotary switch, and a grip to talk switch. These are all accessories that we use with our microphones. So I want to show you a person here. January 31st, 1949, Rose Langer. She was hired as an administrative assistant. Now, I typically wouldn't mention this, except eventually she would marry Mr. Shure in 1954 and become the owner of Shure in 1995 after the death of Mr. Shure. So Mrs. Shure actually had a career, let's see, how long was it? Almost a 70-year career at the company. Now it's 1950. Hi-fi, that's a new word, high fidelity, is starting to get really popular in homes. And we start to actually aim our products not only at the jukebox and like the teenagers playing records, but now at the home hi-fi market. And these cartridges here were designed to play microgroove records as well as 78 records. We found that in areas around the world that had a lot of high humidity, like the southern states, parts of Asia and so forth, that the Rochelle salt crystals that were used in some of our cartridges would actually fail. So here we come up with the TropaPack. This is a way to actually seal up the package so the humidity in these other countries would not affect the microphones or the phonograph cartridges. I just like that term, TropaPack. Here's a cross-reference catalog. These are all the different brands of phonograph cartridges and radio phonographs that the Shure cartridges could be used in. And notice, our emphasis is on replacement business. When your cartridge or your phonograph or your needles wear out, and you got any of these brands, you can put a new Shure cartridge in to replace those brands. And we developed another controlled reluctance microphone. We had them already, but this was basically a drop-in replacement. If you had a microphone that had a crystal element in it or a carbon mic element and you wanted to update it and get better fidelity and greater reliability, then you could put it in a Shure replacement controlled reluctance mic element. Again, aftermarket is the term that's used. Here's a 1950 print ad showing the advantages of the controlled reluctance microphones. The Hercules was one example, the Green Bullet, Ranger, Dispatcher. We don't have time to get into controlled reluctance, but during the Q&A question time, if you want me to explain how they operate, I'll be happy to do that. So, April 25th, 1950, that's our 25th anniversary. We have grown to about 500 employees, up from 100 in 1940. So the 40s were a good time for us. And I love this. Mr. Shure revealed his salary in April 1925 when the company was founded as $20 per week. And the total value of his inventory of the Shure radio company back then was $11.93. How things have changed. 1951, and here's the 8 categories of products that we offered. Microphones, military headphones, telephone handsets, phonograph pickup cartridges, needles, wire and tape recording heads, and vibration pickups. I think it's just interesting to note in 2020 that only one of those categories remains for us. So our business has changed dramatically since 1951. 1951, so the Unidyne 1 came out in 1939, and that was 12 years later. And we bring out what's called the Unidyne 2, or the 55S. S simply stood for small. And the reason we needed to bring out a small version was that television was getting very popular then, and they liked the Unidyne 1, but they were telling Shure it just hides too much of the person's face when they're on TV. Make a smaller version of it. So we did. And we brought out the Unidyne 2, the small version, in 1951. And of course, that's the size that we still make today. Interesting fact about the Unidyne, from 1939 to 2020, it has never been out of production. So what we're talking about 82 years now, or 81 years now, and that product has never been discontinued. It's always had some version of it. Now of course, we make the Super 55, we make the 55SH Series 2. This shows you the difference. So here's the larger Unidyne 1, and here's the smaller broadcast Unidyne. Now, we didn't call it broadcast, but eventually, but this is how we were advertising it. You can use it on TV now because it's so much smaller. The other interesting thing is that the 556S, which was the broadcast version of the 55S, had a new connector on it, and that connector was known as the XL connector, of course, now known as the XLR connector. So this was one of the very first Shure products that actually used an XLR connector. We introduced our first ribbon microphone in 1939. We got back into the ribbon microphone business around 1951 with the Model 300. This here, and this is the 315. If you look at the connectors closely, this is what's called an Amphenol connector, which is no longer used. And over here was an early XL connector. By the way, X was the series. L meant it had a latch on it. And R eventually meant it had a rubber insert in the middle. So XLR, that's what it stood for. 1952, we continued to sell aftermarket pickups and needles. Now there's 78 records out there. There are 45 records out there, and there's 33 and a third records out there. And so all of them required different types of needles. This was good business for us because these different standards meant people had to have a variety of different cartridges. 1947, that was that memo about wireless microphones, and here it is in 1953. I'm sure introduced the world's first wireless mic system with a handheld transmitter. It's called the Vagabond 88. The price was $700 for a transmitter and a receiver, and you could transmit, maybe 20 meters, maybe 30 meters, like in feet, maybe 30 or 40 feet. This $700 price, by the way, translates to about $6,800 today. Yeah, $6,800 to replace a 30-foot cable. This was pre-transistor. So not only did the receiver have tubes in it, this transmitter had 5 miniature vacuum tubes in it. Here's a photo. If you look here very closely, there's 2 of the miniature vacuum tubes. Here was the 30-volt battery that operated it. It was looks like a longer 9-volt battery. And there also was a 1.5-volt battery down here, which ran the filaments of the tube, of the 5 tubes. And here's the actual receiver itself. Here's an ad for it. The Vagabond wireless microphone system. I love it. It's the first practical wireless microphone system ever developed. No cables, no battery wiring. It operated at 2 megahertz, if I remember correctly. And this is everything you got. You got the transmitter, you got a carrying case, you got this device here, which went onto a mic stand, and you would set the microphone into it. Actually had a lapel cable or a lavalier cable you could hang around your neck and hang this really long microphone out. This thing's probably about 14 inches long, I would guess. Look kind of funny. And there's your receiver, and there's your antennas. Here's a Vagabond demonstration at a 1954 trade show in Chicago. Again, you can see there's no wire here. 54, it's the atomic age. Everything's atomic. And so we came up with this new logo that showed the Shure logo with atoms flowing all around it. And what are we making? Microphones, no surprise there. Phonograph cartridges, tape recording heads. So the whole market for magnetic recording devices is booming, and we are all set there. So you can see over here, there's a ribbon mic, there's a dynamic mic, ribbon, dynamic, crystal, and control magnetic. And here are some of our phonograph cartridges and our tape heads at the bottom. So the OEM recording head business flourished. We had lots of customers like Webster, Bolensack, Bell & Howell, and Revere. And here's an example of some of our tape recording heads and our wire recorder heads. Again, you can tell the difference. It has a flat spot here that is for tape, and it has a little groove that's for wire recorders. In fact, here's a close-up of an 812 wire recorder slot, and you can see that slot that wire went into. Here's an example of us trying to make one mic that fits all. It's a lavalier. It's a floor stand mic. It's a desk stand mic. It does everything. This was a crystal mic, relatively inexpensive. Let's see if there's a price on there. Is it about the price? Oh, there we go. $18.95 and $21 if you got it with the switch. This is called the Slimex. Wasn't a success for us, but it's an interesting idea of marketing, of how you have one microphone that can do it all. 1954, we debuted a ribbon microphone with an ultra cardioid pattern, the model 333. So ribbon microphones up to this point were all figure 8 bidirectional. And Ben Bauer, that genius, figured out a way to take his Uniphase network and put it into a ribbon microphone and basically make a supercardioid ribbon microphone. And this is the world's first example of a supercardioid ribbon microphone from 1954, with an XLR connector, of course, because it was aimed at the broadcast market. In 1954, we also expanded into microphone calibration services. This is something we did for about 10 years. We do not do it anymore, but you'd send your microphones back to Shure, and we would recalibrate them for you. And May 17th, 1954, Mr. Shure, age 52, weds Rose Langer, age 33, in a civil ceremony at Chicago City Hall. So the gift they got was all the people that were working at Shure at the time signed a book, basically with their good wishes. We actually still have that book in the Shure archive. Also in 1954, a few months later, we announced that our company will leave downtown Chicago. We had been in Chicago, downtown Chicago, from 1925 to 1954, and had simply run out of room. It was very expensive rent, And so Shure decided to build a new factory and headquarters in Evanston, Illinois. Evanston, Illinois is a suburb that's right at the northern border of Chicago. When you leave Chicago and all of a sudden you go across the street and you're in Evanston. And we started building a new headquarters at 222 Hartree Avenue there. That's where I was hired, by the way. And people ask me, why did we choose Evanston? Well, Mr. Shure was a very smart guy, but also very kind to his employees. When he started to start looking for a new location, he took a map of Chicago and he put pins in it about where everybody lived. And then he looked at a central location that also had public transportation, and Evanston was the place. So Evanston wasn't necessarily convenient for him to go. It was convenient for everybody to go to, and that's why we chose Evanston. Here you can see our Evanston plant under construction. This is in 1955. This is one thing, that little deep hole there, that's where the Anechoic Chamber went. So the Anechoic Chamber is a test chamber where we test out microphones, basically a quote-unquote soundproof room. It has to be isolated from the rest of the building. So they actually build a building within a building, and they put it into that hole right there. Before we moved up to Evanston and 222 Hartree, we opened up a smaller place in 1948 Ridge Avenue. And the only reason I put this in there is because this is about 2 blocks from where I'm currently sitting. My house is located very closely to where Shure's first plant was in Evanston. 1955, we introduced a microphone. This was actually designed for television. This was an interview microphone, a microphone that the person doing the interview could be a reporter, could be an MC of some sort. And this is called a Slendine. And this showed, I love this, Miss Slendine. I'm not sure there actually was a Miss Slendine contest, but this is probably a trade show thing. But this is our attempt at making an on-air television interview microphone. This is something a lot of people don't realize. 1955, Cold War, United States and Russia were in a Cold War, and spying and bugging was a big thing. Well, we were actually making little tiny microphones that we said were being put into dictation machines, hearing assistants, and so forth. Indeed, they were, but they also were being used by the CIA for bugging operations. A friend of mine recently was in a museum in Berlin, and they had various bugging devices that were being used by the East Germany when Germany was divided, and many of them had these little Shure microphones inside them. Also, hi-fi, again, getting bigger and bigger. So now we start to actually come up with music lovers, not only just not phonograph cartridges to play back your pop records, but also when you have the big hi-fi systems, we want you to have our music lover system. So the whole hi-fi boom, which was started in the mid-50s and went all the way through the early 80s, was a very big portion of our business. Just an example. By the way, I mentioned the Rochelle salt crystal before. Well, it had problems because being a salt, it could actually absorb moisture, it would dissolve and so forth with high humidity. There was something called barium titanate that was brought out, and this was a ceramic, and that's eventually begun to replace Rochelle salt crystals. So you will see, if you look at the catalogs in the 1950s, in the 60s and 70s, you will see cartridges and microphones which are called ceramic cartridges. Same idea. You actually make a ceramic block of ceramic, cut a very thin slice off, hold one end down, stress the other end, and you get an electrical signal. That's what you get from barium titanate. So from 1946 to 1955, we had 22 patents. 16 were utility patents and 6 are design patents. Let me explain the difference. Utility patents are for how something operates. Design patent is for how something looks. So, for example, here is a design patent for a Burt shell for a microphone. That actually is a design for the early Vagabond. Between 46 and 55, we had to reinvent ourselves. It was a post-war business environment, and we had become, as I mentioned, a wartime supplier. And we were becoming an innovative manufacturer of microphones, phonograph cartridges, and recording heads. So that's the change. We went from being a wartime supplier to a company that was making consumer products for radio stations and home hi-fi and wire recorders and tape recorders. So this was the change we went in that 10 years. So by 1955, again, we had moved out of Chicago, and there it is, our new headquarters at 222 Hartree Avenue, Evanston, Illinois. Every time I look at that, I remember the first day I walked in there, that right there in 1976, to start my new job, and been there since 1944. That building is still there, by the way. Shure no longer owns it, and it's actually been turned into a car dealership, an automobile dealership. Now, the decade from 56 to 65, which we are not going to cover today, would bring even greater opportunities because there is the advent of the stereo long-playing record, the LP, and the explosive growth of rock and roll. We happen to be just at the right place at the right time, and we responded with a moving magnet stereo phonograph cartridges that we probably sold 200,000, 300,000 per year, I would guess. And the Unidyne 3 microphone came out for rock and roll, and that's the SM58 and the SM57. So I'd just like to end up this part of it with, this is Mr. Shure, and this quote for him: in spite of changing conditions, changing markets, and changing operations, there are fundamental principles that we must maintain. These principles give meaning to the name Shure and its perception by the outside world and by our associates. We know very well that absolute perfection cannot be attained, but we will never stop striving for it. And those are words that we still live by today in 2020. So that wraps up the official portion of it. And now what I would like to do is open up to any questions that we have. Are you guys still there, we hope?
Yeah, everyone that joined is everyone I still see here. What a wonderful session, Michael. I really enjoyed that. I don't see any questions typed in. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. Some of the designs of some of these microphones, I mean, they just look so cool.
Aren't they great?
They just look so cool. They look so cool.
And you know what they're based on? They're based on the front of cars, automotive grills. If you go back and you look at cars from the 1930s, they're based on that. And they're also based on the whole streamlining thing, rockets and dirigibles and the fronts of cars. And they're classic designs that still look cool today, and everybody likes them.
Yep. We should definitely do another session maybe in a few weeks and take the next decade after that, because I think it's a very, very interesting session to have. Thank you very, very much.
Well, I do see two questions and answers there. You want to look at them?
Hey, there you go. Okay, so the first question is regarding Shure certification. Shivam, you can email me and I'll help you out with that. The next question says, please remind me of the mic used for blues harmonica, and is it still made today?
Yes, the answer is yes. So today the version is called a 520DX. It's called the Green Bullet. If you go on eBay and you put in Shure Green Bullet and my name, you'll see about a 5-minute video that we produced about how it came about. It's a very interesting story. I'll expand a little bit about that. So when I started at Shure in 1976, one of the projects I was put on was to discontinue the Green Bullet microphone, because we looked at our company, our dealers who were selling two-way radio microphones, and they were hardly selling any Green Bullets. So we said, might as well get rid of it. So the announcement goes out to the world that we're going to get rid of the Green Bullet, and we get letters. Now this is before the internet. Letters from around the world. You guys are the stupidest people I've ever seen in my life. This is the greatest harmonica microphone in the world, and we had no idea it was being used as harmonica microphones. So obviously we kept it. And again, here it is now 71 years later, and we still make it. So the current version is a 520DX.
Awesome. So there's another question. Can you explain a little more about wire recording?
Yes, sure. It's the same concept. So tape recording, you basically have a plastic tape, flat tape, which has had iron fragments or embedded into it, so that when it passes over the head, those fragments are pulled up. It's exactly the same concept, except now you're using a wire which is magnetic. So the concept is exactly the same. The only difference is that it's a round wire rather than a flat piece of tape, and it has to go through at a much faster speed. It goes through with about 24 inches a second. Same concept. I think it was invented by the Germans during World War II. And when the war was over, the United States basically took that technology. But it's astonishing to me how good these things sound. They're just lovely little devices. Now you can imagine that if you got a steel wire passing over a recording head, that recording head would eventually wear out because this wire would actually want to cut the recording head in two. So one of the downsides was that the recording heads had to be replaced on a regular basis. But the concept is exactly the same, except it's a steel wire. And how thick is a steel wire? Probably, I don't know, maybe 1/10 of a millimeter. It's really kind of almost looks like a human hair, but very, very strong. Hope that answers the question.
There's someone that wants to know a little more about RF tubes that were used back in the day in the wireless microphones.
Sure, that technology came from World War II. It was think about again World War II pre-transistor, and they had walkie-talkies. So Motorola and other companies that developed walkie-talkies had these miniature RF tubes. I can't remember the manufacturer of them. But they basically, when the war ended, we basically took the technology that was used for two-way walkie-talkies and just reused it for wireless microphones. We basically expanded the frequency range of it, so it sounded better. But it's the same type of idea. So they're about probably maybe an inch long, I would guess, and they were used widely for not only for walkie-talkies or two-way radio during World War II. After the war, they were used for hearing aids as well. And, of course, that was something we discussed.
No, but, here's another very interesting question. Considering that they had tubes, what was the voltage draw for those microphones? And, what kind of batteries powered them?
Well, there was two batteries. There was a 30-volt battery, which looked just like a current 9-volt as far as size, but about, maybe an inch longer. It's just like a long 9-volt. And that was a 30-volt battery. That was used, no surprise, during World War II for the walkie-talkies. And then there was another battery. It was a round mercury battery that was 1.5 volts, and that actually ran the filaments inside the tube. What's surprising is the battery life. Because it was a very low power device, those batteries would last 12 to 14 hours. Keep in mind, you'd only transmit 30 feet.
Yeah, that's it's hard to believe 30 feet. But here's another interesting question from our friend Christopher. Was there a restriction on the sale of bugging microphones to the Warsaw Pact countries during the Cold War?
That's a great question. I don't know of any. I do know this. At that time, during when the Warsaw Pact existed, Shure did not have any distribution centers in those countries, so they weren't buying anything directly from us. It certainly wouldn't surprise me though if there were suppliers in Europe that basically smuggled some across the border. I'm not certain. I know Russia made some of their own. We had an engineer that worked at Shure named Yuri Shulman, who was from Russia, and he was actually over there during the Cold War. And he said Russia had their own miniature microphone suppliers, but he says, but they were not as small and not as reliable as the Shures, and the Shures were considered like the gold standard of bugging microphones. As you might imagine, the government has not given me much information on that.
Oh, awesome. So yeah, we don't have any more questions, but resounding answer for a next session about the next 10 years is a resounding yes from the people that are on board. So we'll definitely schedule that after a few weeks, Michael.
Well, I'll have to start working on it because I don't have one done for that. Yeah. But what I will send you is I will give you a list of things I actually have, ready to go, and there might be something else interesting in the meantime in case I can't get around it because I've actually got a few of these scheduled for July, so I'm not sure how long it will take me to do one about the next decade, but maybe some of the other ones I've got will be of interest to your audience as well.
Awesome, awesome. There's one last question.
Yes.
Yep. So this question says during the World War, and you had mentioned that Shure was a supplier for microphones
Yes.
to the Army.
Yes.
How was the audio transmission done back in the day? Was it like something like a radar, or what form of transmission? I'm guessing it would be like a AM back in the day.
Yes, right. Yeah, AM radio. Absolutely. And of course, AM radio has lots of advantages. Disadvantages. You have to have long antennas, right? Of course, but with AM radio, long wavelengths, you could send it a long distance, but there's also a lot of interference. So yes, the two-way radios back then were all AM radio with all the problems that went along with it. So someone asked me the other day when I did this one, were we the only supplier of microphones and headphones? And the answer is no. There was probably 5 or 6 suppliers around the country that made the same devices because you would never want to be single sourced. Though there was no bombing in the United States during World War II, if there had been, for example, and the Shure plant had been bombed, then of course there would be no microphones. So there was 5 or 6 companies that were making the same products as we were. We were the largest and the most reliable, which we're quite proud to say. But that's a good question. So that was all AM radio transmission.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks, Michael. We don't have any more questions, but a lot of people writing in that they're so happy to hear from you and hear the session from you.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it immensely. Next time we do it, I'll figure out the half-hour time zone so you guys don't sweat. So you guys don't sweat it out. my apologies for that. Oh, it says 3 new questions. Are there any other questions here? I don't have to go. I'll answer as long as you want.
Yeah, I've read.
Go ahead.
No, I don't see any more questions.
Okay. Well, let me offer this for for the customers and for the audience. If you want to ask me a question directly, I have no problem giving you my email address. I'm happy to answer that. And it is, I'll say it first, and then I'll do it slowly. It's Pettersen_Michael@Shure.com. So Pettersen is PETTERSEN, and then an underscore MICHAEL at Shure, SHURE.com. Pettersen_Michael@Shure.com. If you forget that, send it to my friends in Bangalore and they'll forward it over to me. But I love to hear from customers, particularly with historical questions, because it's fun for me to research and it's a little bit like a quiz for me. Can I answer the question?
All right. Thank you very much, Michael.
Welcome.
And we'll plan and look forward to the next one. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. It's always a pleasure, conducting these sessions with you. I know it's always technical from my end, but today it was good to get a break from the technicality of modern Shure equipment and just go back in history to where a lot of it started.
Indeed.
Okay, so any more words from you, Michael? And
thank you for your interest. I feel very fortunate. I've had 5 different careers at Shure. This for me is the most fun, and it really makes my heart feel good when I learn of interest around the world in their history, because it's so interesting to me, and to share it, it's just a joy. So thank you for listening. And again, I invite your questions and ideas for new programming as well. But again, and don't be shy about sending me an email directly if you have a question. I'm happy to do that. By the way, and also there actually is lots of good Shure history information on the Shure YouTube channel. I just posted one recently. It's just do YouTube Shure. There's a one about the history of the SM58, which I did. And it's recorded, but we could do it live as well if you wanted to do that. I'm happy to do that.
Lovely. You know what I'd actually really like to do live is, all the microphones that you reviewed, all the vintage stuff, to maybe just let everyone listen to what those microphones actually sound like.
Yeah,
because you'd assume that a microphone from so long back probably wouldn't sound that great, but on the contrary, they sound like, as good as anything else that's available today.
absolutely true. Absolutely true. What we hear the microphones in general through a scratchy record, an old film or something, but the microphones themselves, they were not the source of the poor quality. The microphones from the 30s sound really, really good. So yeah, we could set that up. I've actually got recordings of most of those. Not every single mic, because but I have an example of a carbon. I have an example of a crystal. I have an example of a controlled magnetic. We have those, and they're pretty amazing with the fidelity. The Unidyne 1 from 1939, it sounds pretty much like a Unidyne 2 from 2020.
Nice. Cool. So thank you very much, Michael. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Hope you guys have a good evening, and Michael, have a great day ahead.
Thank you, gentlemen.
See you
Thank you
guys
all for listening. I appreciate it. This is fun for me.
Take care. Take care.